13-year-old twins Carson and Jessie weren't gifted with the privilege of family time as the summer holidays made a hot and sunny appearance. School was out, and their friends were venturing off on holidays abroad or camping trips with their parents and extended family members. Carson and Jessie's parents might be dirty rich, but they had no time for their children. They worked all of the time. When they didn't, they attended fancy parties and events. Dined out in the evenings with friends and colleagues just as wealthy and just as egotistical. Their son Carson and daughter Jessie were often forgotten about. The twins almost felt like lodgers in their own home, but the house itself was that unnecessarily big they might as well be. They and their parents didn't cross paths at home much. Carson and Jessie had basically been raised by the live-in nanny that had been present since they were both 5 years old. She might as well be their mother. Now it was as it always was. The hot weather had arrived, and school was out for summer, which meant Carson and Jessie would be pawned off on their nanny, or if she was busy, which she was this time around with family of her own, then they would be sent to a camp or a club of some kind. This time, it was summer camp 4 hours away from their hometown. But the twins were used to it. They had passed caring about being away from their parents. They never spent time with them anyway, so what did it matter? They believed they were getting too old for camps and clubs, but it wasn't their choice where they went or what they did. Their parents would rather the twins out of the way, and camp for the summer was a great option for them. Money was no issue after all. It was the first day of camp, in the middle of a vast forest where many wooden cabins were situated for kids and teens to stay. There were many camp leaders dotted around as always. Some young adults, and a few older people too. Carson and Jessie kept to themselves like they always did when they were sent away somewhere against their will. They stuck to each other's company rather than branching out and making friends apart from when they would retreat to their cabins at night, which they didn't share. It was late afternoon now, as the twins perched on one of the picnic benches scattered in and around the large clearing where all of the cabins were located. They watched younger kids running around and playing, kids their own age engaging in board games or art projects and seemingly enjoying their time at the camp. Carson and Jessie were bored because nothing there interested them. They were glad it was time for bed when camp leaders called for everyone to make their way to their respective cabins, as curfew was fast approaching. But Jessie had other ideas, ones that might make their time a little more fun and intriguing. "Shall we sneak out of the cabins and go explore later?" She grinned at her brother, leaning back against the table and waiting for his reply. He looked up at her, smiling mischievously. "I'm down, what time?" The twins agreed on midnight. They would sneak out of their separate cabins, which were across the forest clearing from one another, and head further into the woods through the creepy dark night. They'd tell ghost stories and ghoulish tales just to purposely freak themselves out. It was all a part of the thrill. All of the girls sharing the cabin with Jessie were fast asleep by the time midnight came around. Carson's bunkies were too. The twins, individually, slipped on some clothes and grabbed a flashlight each, before quietly making their exits, and successfully avoiding creating any disturbance for the kids sharing the cabins with them as they joined one another in the middle of the clearing. "Are you ready?" Carson asked his sister excitedly, to which Jessie agreed. The twins set off into the night, hurrying with discretion away from the main camp and into the blackness of the tall trees. They relied on the glow of their flashlights to guide them into the unknown, as Jessie started to make up a scary story for Carson to hear, exaggerating her tone of voice and holding her light under her chin to creepily illuminate her features as she spoke. They walked for over 20 minutes, until Carson started to stress more and more that they were lost, which they were. Jessie hadn't been as concerned as her brother, but she certainly was now. They had no idea where they were or how to get back to camp. The twins were growing restless and fear was beginning to grow. They thought they could hear voices at some points, which only frightened them more. But Jessie expressed that it must be their minds playing tricks on them. The more they attempted to recount their steps, the more lost and helpless they were beginning to feel. Panic was setting in, as Carson decided they should start calling out for help. Maybe their cries would travel through the dead of the night and reach the camp. They needed to be found soon, before a bear or coyote got to them first. Carson went to call out in desperation, but Jessie immediately silenced her brother before he could do so. She heard something, what she believed to be voices in the distance. Hushed voices that they couldn't quite make out. The twins were apprehensive about their next move, but ultimately decided to follow what they heard. It was most likely the older camp leaders, doing what the kids thought they wouldn't, now that they were enjoying their free time in the forest. Carson and Jessie followed the muffled voices, and, to their confusion and gnawing feelings of unease, were brought to a small clearing, lit up with strange wooden torches, burning with balls of fire. Around them, in the clearing, the twins witnessed the older camp leaders. The adults, and some of the younger leaders too. All of them were dressed in weird black hooded cloaks, and those uneasy feelings inside of the twins started to slide into overdrive. The adults of the summer camp were muttering and whispering all kinds of strange things that Carson and Jessie didn't understand. But they did understand one word: sacrifice. Or, in this case, sacrifices. The adults discussed two sacrifices as a woman started to etch bizarre symbols into the clearing's earth. The two sacrifices were Carson and Jessie. They might not know what was happening, but they did know that it was not good. It was bad, and certainly dangerous. They looked at each other with a terror filling their eyes like never before, and they ran. They ran for what they believed to be their lives. But the snapping of branches and rustle of leaves beneath their feet was enough noise to draw the attentions of the summer camp adults. The last thing the twins heard was the voice of someone yelling for the others to catch them, and fast. They ran and ran. Their hearts pounded and their breath was raspy as they darted over the forest floor. Fleeing for their young lives, Carson and Jessie hoped and prayed that they would make it out alive as the adults supposed to take care of them came bounding through the trees in hungry pursuit. The word sacrifice rang out through the twins' heads over and over again, as screaming and shouting could be heard from behind them, coming from the camp leaders. But the twins kept running, determined to escape. With the slight assistance of their amateur flashlights, the twins persisted onwards together. After what felt like forever, Carson and Jessie sped through the forest without slowing down, until their legs brought them out into the open once more. They skidded into a parking lot, where a car was sitting idly with its headlights on. A young man and a woman jumped out when they spotted the two hysterical teenagers coming into view, who started yelling and screaming about what was following them, and pleading desperately for help. The young couple ushered the twins into their car and they drove away with haste, just as three cloaked figures could be seen lurking on the edges of the forest. The woman frantically called the police when all that Carson and Jessie were telling them was making sense to her, and officers were immediately dispatched, on their way to the forest as the operator and the young woman spoke. Carson and Jessie were so relieved to be alive that they started to cry uncontrollably. If that couple had not been there, at the unbelievably right time, then who knows what would have happened to the twins. Days would pass by, after that terrifying night at summer camp. Police had arrived quickly, removing all sleeping children from their cabins, and parents being notified of the circumstances. Multiple camp leaders had been discovered, still trying to perform or complete strange and dangerous rituals of some sort. They were all arrested after obvious evidence of cult activity was found in the clearing, and in their cabins. The fact Carson and Jessie had been the chosen sacrifices that night meant that all of the other children present at the camp were spared, saved in time for police to arrive on the scene. Carson and Jessie were never sent to another summer camp by their parents after that horrific ordeal. Their mother and father actually began to show more of an interest in their children and make the effort to spend time with them after the near possibility of losing them in such a disturbing setting. It was certainly a frightful story to tell in years to come. One that 13-year-old twins Carson and Jessie would surely never, ever forget.